Hi, it's Elise Lunan, host of Pulling the Thread. Today I'm talking to one of my favorite repeat guests, psychotherapist Satya Doyle Byock. Many of you will be familiar with Satya by now. She's been on Pulling the Thread a number of times. She's a Jungian psychotherapist and a good pal of mine. She wrote the book Quarter Life. In fact, we are conspiring on a retreat at Omega Institute this May 2026. Omega's in Rhinebeck. We're doing a 4-day, I think it's 4-day retreat. You can find it on their website. I'll include a link below about channeling what wants to come through you in this moment of time. It will be really fun. Anyhow, we we cover a lot of varied ground today, as we always do, but we're focusing in part on the duality of individuation and community. We talk about the difference between individuation and individualism. This is very important, and why it's so critical for all of us to individuate, to go on our own individual journey so that we can genuinely be a part of the collective and not just subject to herd mentality. We also talk about our search for meaning and why Satya encourages people to trust an irrational guide. And we talk about getting in touch with our daemons, which you can think of as an inner genius, a spark that wants to come through you. Okay, here we go. Well, hello. I was just thinking about you because I was trying. I did effectively get home, but it took, 24 hours to get home from Montana this week. And I was like, oh, this just really brings me back to my childhood and being stranded every time we tried to leave the state.
Because the weather was so bad? What happened? I haven't.
Um, the weather was fine where we were, but the plane to get to Kalispell to pick us up was delayed, apparently through weather, because when we were delayed for 4 hours and landed in Salt Lake City at 1 a.m, Delta told us that, of course, they would not be providing any accommodations because it was weather somewhere in the United States.
Right.
It's wild how these airlines manage to sidestep all responsibility. Remember when as a kid, I feel like as a kid, they'd be like, here's a meal voucher. Here's some money to go buy some toiletries. It was just a different standard of care, you know?
It was. It was a
It
different time.
was. You dress up in the hopes of an
Metal
upgrade that
cutlery.
would never come. Yeah. Oh, God.
Glad you made it home.
Yeah,
Glad you made it home.
exactly.
It's
I
nice to
was
see
not,
you. This is fun that we get to do this. I'm looking
I
forward
know,
to
I
it.
love these seasonal updates. Um, and, it's like a homecoming every time.
Every time.
All right. So today I want to talk about, obviously, you and I are professionally coming together in May to do a retreat at Omega, which will be a multi-day. I'll include all the details in the show notes, but people who are listening who find this conversation we're going to have interesting should think about coming and hanging with us. I've never been to Omega. I've heard it's gorgeous. And I'm really excited to do this with you and collaborate and bring people through an experience that will be both structured, but you can't plan for the extemporaneous magic, right?
No, you can't. And I think our job is to create the right container and the right conditions and attract the right people and provide all of the right components so that it does feel magical. That's absolutely my goal. And I think it's going to be. It's 5 days. I mean, I mean, it's not a month, but I think 5 days altogether ends up feeling like a very extended break and time away. And I think we're going to dive into a lot of cool territory together.
Yeah. And I've made a vow to myself, maybe to you quietly, but not overtly too, to not cram it with so much content that there's no time for communing, conversation, reflection, and just whatever needs to happen in each person. It's funny, I've been to a fair number of retreats, and my favorite ones have a few hours of content, but mostly it's homework and it's being with other people and maybe going for a walk, that we're all having our own experience as we're going through a collective
Right.
journey. So
Well,
that's the goal
I
here too.
I love that and I'm with you and I think in this moment say that almost everyone around me is going through a portal.
Yeah.
We are in a collective portal. We are in individual portals. There is so much astrology happening right now, and so much suffering happening collectively, and so many personal life events taking place that I also think anticipating that when we all gather in May, part of what we're doing is giving people also a break from the exhaustion and creating care and community and support to actually do some self-care and reflection and community and just being together. It's so
And I
important.
also, it's so important. And I want to name joy and also laughter and the fact
Yes.
that I think individually, what's so complicated, beyond, I mean, one of the things that's so incredibly complicated, I think also for women, although I don't want to speak for men, particularly men who are listening to this show, I feel like they probably have a well balanced masculine feminine, which we're going to dig into today as well. But I am feeling such a wide swing between what's happening for me internally and professionally and how well my kids are doing right now and what's happening on the collective level, and that the two are not necessarily resonating at the same vibration. And so it feels really important to both acknowledge, wow, I have so much to be grateful for. Everything is wonderful over here and terrible over here, and that's okay. In fact, it makes me well resourced to deal with the external. But I
I
feel
think,
like I hear a lot from women in particular that they're like, I don't feel okay being okay right now.
yeah, I mean, I also think it's a little bit of what I think we're going to talk about today, but is also the creative self. And that to me, it also speaks to how much you are in a generative place doing what you actually need to be doing for the collective as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that, there's the quality of like the medicine man or the people who are holding a spiritual center for others have already on some level anticipated collective decay and collapse. So there's a way in which I also think you're out in front a little bit.
Yes.
Um,
I feel like
and
I've gone through all of my voids, not all of them, but many voids in the last 5 to 10 years in preparation for this moment.
so it's
Yeah.
there's also a beautiful offering that you're not crumbling simultaneous to the other crumbling. And
Yeah.
you know, I mean, you and I have been talking on text and whatnot about Francis Weller's recent book. You interviewed him, and the idea of rough initiation and the idea of initiation experiences is really core to my own work, my own book, and my own understanding of human development, the development of consciousness, and just the quality with which we are all being really sent through. I mean, I think there is very real analogies to labor pains and the birth canal and the quality of just being worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and thinking this death or birth. Like we don't know.
Yeah.
The mother and the baby don't know. We don't know right now. We don't know if this is death or birth. And I think it's important to also have midwives on the outside who can handle it. And
Yeah.
I see you as one of those people, Elise. So
Thank you. You as well. And I think that that's the perfect analogy. The long dark is what Francis Weller calls this period too, which I think is fitting. And one of the things that Satya and I really wanted to dig into with people is if this is an initiatory cycle, if we're each in our own long, painful, arduous birthing process, what does that look like individually as well as collectively? And what in this moment wants to come through each one of us, and what needs to die in order for that to happen? I think we're watching structures, both big and small, crumble, right? And sometimes those are the small edifices in our own lives. Sometimes those are the dismantling of entire agencies and governmental bodies, or norms or whatever it may be. And that's scary. And yet there's an opportunity here, I think, for many of us to say, okay, well, that wasn't working, even though I want to cling to that snail shell. It's too small, it's too tight, it wasn't meeting my needs. So I'm out, exposed, looking for this next vehicle. And so maybe as we're together, that can be one of the things that we each hold. Like, what do I need to let go of? What's the bank that I'm holding on to that I need to let go of in order to get into this river more deeply and get where I want to go? So, and I
It's
love it.
totally,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, it's so consistent what you're saying. And I want to be very clear. Like, I am an extreme amateur astrologer. I actually don't consider myself on any level an astrologer, but I really love paying attention to the archetypal nature of what's happening astrologically and just allowing it to be this kind of poetic system that we're living inside of. And one of the very major things that just shifted was the coming together of Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So Neptune left Pisces and entered Aries about a month ago, and Neptune moves. I mean, I'm going to get this wrong, but let's say it moves every 16 years or something. It changes signs every 16 years. And Saturn changes signs every 2.5 years or so. They have not come together for over 30 years in the same spot in the sky, in the same place. They're right now in the same place. And it's a remarkable moment archetypally because one, Saturn is entirely about structure and stability and creating structure. And I really think of it as like this the father archetype who through very tough love and consistency will mature you. It will force the construction of new systems and new skills and new growth. And Neptune is all about dissolving. It's all about the deep, watery, unconscious, and it can move towards addiction and psychosis if you're not careful, but it can also introduce you to the dream world. And so to have these two completely contrary planets in the same place in the sky, I feel like is a lot of what you were just expressing about this simultaneous process we're in right now as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, we are living in interesting times, and it is archetype. I think every people who were not interested in any of this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago are suddenly waking up to, okay, this is inexplicably strange and unknown, and there's something to this, to some of these old systems that put a little bit of structure and order and meaning around these moments. It's really juicy. It's fun. I feel like just in my own, I'm sure you're experiencing this too, but this onboarding of people who are now drinking from a fire hose and trying to catch up because suddenly they're like, okay, wait, now I'm starting to be open to all sorts of things that have been talking about, or these
Yeah,
systems that have
totally.
been explaining these phenomena for
Yeah, I mean
millennia.
it's kind of like a, it's a collective near death experience. It's like you really do start encountering other layers of consciousness or existence because you've come that close to the brink.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so many people are feeling that.
Yeah. And synchronicities and just, okay, here I am. I've been brushing into this person again and again and again. All right, I'm going to listen. I'm going to pay attention. Um, One of the things that's obviously core to Carl Jung's sort of meta theory and your work as well is this tension of opposites, this duality structure, the binaries that organize our entire world. This is, as you know, what my next book is about. And it's also what so much of your work is about, right? Quarter Life is about that, the dual pull of structure and meaning, which is a lifelong struggle, right? That so many of us are like, I want the safety and security, but I also don't want to feel dead inside at my corporate job. This is not a struggle that ever goes away, right? It's a hard won synergy. And I'd say one of the biggest, you could talk about this as masculine and feminine energy, although I think that sets people off or confuses them. But the duality of individuation, which is a very specific word, it's not the same as individualism. Individuation and relationship or community, right? As you were just saying, Self and Society is the name of your Substack. But how do we, and I was thinking about this a lot because I just got back from doing a sort of my final, at least for the moment, stretch of book events and chats. And this one woman, I wish I knew her name so I could probably shout her out, but she was really like taking me on in a way that I loved from the audience. But her point was, I was talking about the need for more women to individuate and how we're conditioned culturally to stay in relationship, right? We're very fearful of standing apart and away from the group. It's tall poppy syndrome, and we have a lot of names for this, but we also collectively see what happens to women who stand alone, right? They generally get knocked down or put back in their place. And I was saying how we desperately need a rebalancing of the feminine, which can also be very beautifully expressed by men, but that individuation and in relationship, and that the two poles need to be brought into balance. And this woman at this one event she was like, how can you sort of say that we need, again, conflating individualism and individuation? How can you say that? Like, we don't need more rugged individualism. This is what's gotten us into problem. We need to be entirely focused on the collective, entirely focused on the community. And it was interesting because I was like, but we need to do both. Like, it has to be both.
Well, I would add there's no way to be genuinely focused on the collective without being an individual. And
Yeah.
this really is the anchor of Jung's psychology, and I do think it's usually misunderstood. His huge fear was a kind of mass psychosis. You know, it's a groupthink event. It was happening in the era in which he was writing and living. We are seeing it very clearly now. He would speak about the assault of newspapers and the endless amounts of news. Obviously, this was 100 years ago. You know, the level at which we've accelerated the overload of information and then groupthink that happens really kind of virally. I mean, we really experience a kind of viral. I think every time there is any global event that takes over people's nervous systems, certainly with the use of social media, you're no longer really operating as an individual. You're operating in a herd mentality. And the pressure from every side of the political spectrum is to get on board in some form with that herd mentality. And so what Jung was really expressing in the way that I understand individuation to be is if you have not done your own individual journey, which does involve some form of initiation, you haven't actually left the herd consciously to be able to return to the herd. So, you know, you just move with every loud noise wherever the herd is going versus stopping even for a millisecond to wonder what that is so that you can make your own choice. And so, you know, Jung speaks about individuation all the time as about coming into conscious relationship with each other. Like, he talks about this in marriage. He had a very complicated but remarkably beautiful relationship with his wife, in that he actually very deeply understood, again, over 100 years ago, well, 100 years ago, more or less, you know, when they were married, that she was an individual. She wasn't just a woman and his wife. He understood that she was a psychological being and that the two of them needed to do their work in order to genuinely be in relationship with each other and not just be enacting roles. And so I think it's so important to define what it is to be a conscious person in relationship or a conscious person engaging in street protest or engaging in collective action in any way. It's very different than a sense that your nervous system and your psyche are now just in control of the collective.
Yeah. No. And yeah, this is a big theme, and this my next book too. But the fact that, I mean, this is Jung. James Hollis was talking about this with me on the podcast too. But the larger the group, the lower the level of consciousness.
Totally.
And we misunderstand that, or I don't think we understand how you use the word viral, how contagious, how scary it is to deviate from whatever people, and difficult, right? It's like it's sort of an autonomic nervous system response to just seek the safety of wherever everyone else is going.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
and I think
yeah,
that collective, I mean, part of it is that the real way that we respond, I'm just thinking of, of Minnesota, Minneapolis right now as we're talking, and the remarkably creative ways that citizens there have been responding to the assault on their communities, that it's not just been one mass reaction. My own sense, and I hate to speak, I'm so far away from what's happening in Minneapolis. I don't want to in any way interpret this in a way that doesn't feel true to people on the ground, but it feels like Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd protests and all the action that was happening there and all the book groups that were formed and all the conversations that everyone had and all the learning that was taking place at the time was its own initiation for this moment where people are responding in choirs uh, in all these different artistic ways, including very direct street engagement and sharing whistles and 3D printing of whistles, like all these different ways in which the community is responding. You can feel the importance of the individual in that. There's different ideas coming into play to support the whole thing. It doesn't feel like one body moving simultaneously. And
yeah.
I think that's what makes it effective.
Yeah, and it's I have chills even thinking about it when you contrast that against masked, faceless ICE agent automatons, right? Who are moving largely as a unified Gestapo, right? A highly reactive, no thinking, I think we can safely say, overtly violent reaction to whatever's happening. Where
Totally.
particularly because there's an insistence of like they're not saying, okay, this is a problem, right? It's this they're not bringing anyone. They're
Well,
assuming
I
that there's immunity
yeah,
for all
and
action.
I think the real foundation of what's happening with ICE and recruitment is the sense, come join us so that you belong.
Yes.
There's a sense of pulling people in so that they have collective action, so that they feel finally like they are part of something. That is really this is maybe a tricky nuance, but I think it's the opposite of what we're talking about, which is you become yourself, and then in becoming yourself and expressing some form of creativity, however that shows up for you in myriad ways, you together with other people form community
Yeah.
versus that you join something to kind of hide inside of it,
Yeah.
you know.
It's interesting just thinking about let me look up God, this guy I think is from Montana. Hold on, I'm just Googling something. You guys can take this out. Who was the candidate um for the okay. So I don't know if you missed this, but this Trump had nominated a legit white nationalist to a top post at the State Department, who I believe this guy is embarrassingly from Montana, Jeremy Carl. And I don't know if you saw as he was being questioned, but Chris Murphy was questioning him and he was asking him about his ideology. And it was so fascinating to watch because it was bumbling, incoherent, sort of entirely inchoate, really. Like there was nothing there. He couldn't even say, this is what it means to be sort of a white supremacist, and this is what I believe and hold dearly. He could not articulate a platform. So it was wild to watch because you're like, you've subscribed and signed on for something incredibly hateful and venal, but you can't even articulate what it is or why. It was
Well,
actually wild
right.
to see.
Yeah, I
Um,
believe it. I
yeah.
missed that, but I believe it. And I think part of it is that how do you describe your hate if you have to do it without describing the people you hate, you
Yes.
know? And so
Yeah.
I think this is really, it's like belonging to something in order to keep something else out or to be against something else. And I think liberals in America have actually, on some level, we went through that 5 years ago really deeply. And in a way, I think we've turned a corner in terms of collective action where now we're for something also in a very different way. And there's more sense of creative growth and again, like the value of the individual within the collective, that we can be both. We absolutely have to be both. Otherwise, you veer into groupthink that forces you to be against something else or other people.
Yeah.
They're very different energies.
So take me through that. You think that we've successfully gone through that rough initiation? I feel like there's still some vestiges of it, but I
I mean,
agree with you. We needed it.
I think we're absolutely fighting for our lives right now,
Yeah.
but I also think especially what has shown up in Minneapolis, but I think this is all over the country. I think that they were a remarkable example of this, but I also feel this with with the frogs at the protests at the ice building in Portland and the inflatables, and there is a creative energy behind the actions now that to me is another level of consciousness in terms of organizing, and it's a
Yeah.
more effective level because it really expresses uh, we're not just here to be against you. We're here because uh, we know in our bodies and our communities that this is not right and we want something else.
Yeah.
So there's something very generative about it versus fear-based. I guess we spoke about this a little bit, Elise, as I'm saying this. I think we spoke about this when we talked about persona, probably in our last podcast conversation. But it really remains quite, and I don't think Minneapolis had really unfolded at that point. But I think there's a quality with which we have turned the corner in terms of the way we are responding.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is um, what had been sort of rhetoric, and we'd become sort of a party of right speak and censoring each other and being exceptionally intolerant, which is ironic, and not very inclusive, I would say. Um, and I do feel like now we have to live it in a way that's growing us up, hopefully, into a new level of spiritual and emotional maturity, and that's more inclusive, which includes, to use that word again, what does this country look like, including all the people who don't agree with us or think like us. And you can't argue for a non-hierarchical DEI world, right? And say, well, you guys suck, so you're excluded. It just undermines everything that we claim to be for. And so I hope as we come out of this, and as you said, it's a birth, death, labor. We don't know what's going to emerge, but that part of that realization has to be, okay, we all live here, and we need to make this work with each other and be creative and collaborative. And there's actually some really interesting collaboration happening in Montana, our home state, but we
Which, by the
can't
way,
buy.
it's
Yeah.
on my list to talk to you about because I think what's happening in Montana is remarkable right now, and you and I might. I'm supposed to. It's on my list to talk to you about teaming up to do something about it. So,
Oh, great.
yeah, we can put
Let's
a
do
pin in
it.
that.
Yeah. I
But
mean, I have a lot of home state pride, and I think about Montana all the time as a state that doesn't have very many people, that is largely sort of ignored, and yet is potentially a model for a purple future. And that's full of really fascinating people. I mean, we were the first state to send a woman to Congress, Jeanette Rankin, before women had the right to vote.
I know it's
Um,
extraordinary. She
yeah, it's
and she
extraordinary.
was the only. I mean, people might quibble about this, but she was the only senator to vote against entry into both wars, too.
Yeah.
She was very clear about her values at the time. And yes, exactly, the first female senator from any
Yeah.
state.
Just
But I think people misunderstand Montana all the time as being a red state. And it was for our upbringing, for the whole time we've lived there, it was a very purple, like
yeah.
extremely purple. We always had like a Republican governor and two Democratic senators, or vice versa, whatever. Like it would flip and flop, but there was a real sense that people were actually voting for candidates they liked in a different way. I mean, mostly men still, but go ahead.
No, but I think that that's important, and it goes to actually the beginning of our conversation, and that there's something in the water there. And I think about the kids that we grew up with, and a lot of Montana. You know, there's something interesting happening there. I do believe, and I actually wonder now that we're thinking about it in this context whether it's not, maybe it veers into rugged individualism, but that there's a strong vibe in that state towards individualism. And it's very, we birthed the Unabomber. It can sort of go into slightly
Well,
strange.
sort of. He moved there.
He moved there.
I mean, really, he moved there, and I'm don't you can cut this out of the podcast if you want, but I'm a little bit of a um Unabomber defender in the sense that he was not for the violence and the murder, but he was deeply, deeply heartbroken by what was happening. I mean, you should cut this out. This is shit, and you don't want to put this in. But I will just say he moved to Montana
He moved to
as
Montana.
as huge numbers of the evangelical far right MAGA people have. I mean, they are,
Yeah.
and obviously people can move in and out of every state. I don't believe that doesn't make you a Montanan or something, but there's been a huge wave of folks who have moved into Montana and
Yeah.
turned the politics.
Completely. And a lot of money into the Yellowstone Club as well, which has definitely changed the ground game. But largely, Montanans are do not want to be controlled and do really want to believe that they think for themselves. There's not a lot of group mentality, interestingly.
Just
Um,
why we protected abortion rights. I mean, again, people think it's a very red state, but abortion rights are coded into the Constitution in Montana
yes.
and
Same
protected.
with the environment. We have a state constitution where a bunch of students just sued on behalf of the state constitution of Montana. In fact, someone we grew up with helped write that constitution, or the mother of two of my best friends from childhood, Maina and Ellingson. Shout out. But yeah, it's a fascinating state, and I wish. And whenever I'm engaged in political conversations here in Los Angeles, I'm always urging people to go and look at Montana, because it is a really very, very generally quite progressive cities, and a lot of rural Americans and a lot of protectors of the land. Also say that, these are generally, I'd say, the Republicans or the more conservative people are stewards of the land. These things go together in Montana. Ish, you don't look like you're buying it.
Well, no, I guess as I'm hearing you, I think when you say that you're thinking of old red Montana, and
Oh
I think
yeah,
new red,
I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking
yeah,
about like
new,
Western conservative values, which
yeah,
are very conservative and conservation based. So
new conservatives in Montana are doing a lot of plowing over land and building
yes, correct.
insane, massive golf courses. Again, so
But
that's the differentiation of what are we actually looking at in terms of values.
yeah, but the Republicans
So
that we grew up around, I would
yeah,
say, were sort
yeah,
of that. Yeah.
it was a very different feeling in terms of community. And I think you're right in terms of individualism, but I also think holding this tension between the two, as we're talking about, there was a very strong communal sense. And there was the idea that you wouldn't hang out with someone of the other political party was not part of our upbringing. Like we knew everyone around us, we would know maybe who folks were who had very different belief systems, but there was never a feeling that we couldn't laugh and have a conversation and share a coffee or something. That has
100%.
changed.
That's
That has
changed.
changed.
Yeah. But and I think that interestingly, when we think about what brings people together in states like that, when you might be sort of isolated physically, is often people coming together around management of land, management of water. I think about sort of the the yeah, very diverse groups protecting headwaters, et cetera, and water rights, and so on and so forth. Anyway, it's just interesting to think about why people organize in that state. Anyway, didn't mean to take us on a whole Montana detour. I just can't help myself.
We can come back more to focus perhaps, but I do think it's funny, Elise, because um, I might be roping you into some fundraising around this soon, so we can talk.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, no, but I think of Montana. I have no interest in getting into politics. And I also feel like that's the sort of state where you or I could go and be like, there have been some amazing candidates
Of
running
course.
for Senate.
100%.
Yeah. And it
100%.
would be a viable run. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Anywho,
Interesting, Elise. Interesting.
not
Interesting.
happening.
Interesting. I have no interest, but statement. Fascinating.
I don't. Although I do like talking about this stuff, but more from a psychological perspective. All right. So, all right, but to get back to this idea of individuation, I think too, I don't know if this is coming up in your practice and in your school, but what I'm hearing too is this sense of urgency, often from, I'd say, post midlife people, and those who have been tower building and are now sort of like, what ladder has my life, this tower building, like what ladder have I been climbing? They're in search of meaning. This feeling of urgency of, I don't think I've been doing what I am supposed to actually be doing, and how do I serve in a way that feels more creative, more aligned. Do you get that? You must get that all the time. Is that sort of the nuts and bolts of your practice?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think that's happening for a lot of people. In my framework that I write about in my book, I think people both come at it as I don't want to build a life that is meaningless to me. And I built a life that I thought was meaningful and it's not where I expected it would go. Or I was so determined to have safety and security, and now this is not what I want. So there's always, as you said earlier, there's always this tension between stability and meaning. And when structures are crumbling all around us and institutions are just being taken over, or we're learning that the institutions we always believed were good institutions turn out to be riddled with evil characters and terrible things, people begin to do some very deep questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no, yes, that is happening right now, a great deal. And everyone is wondering, well, what do I trust? Who do I rely on? What do I look for? And
Yeah.
what is my work right now? I do think too, you interviewed Michael Meade recently, who is one of my absolute favorite humans. And he's a mythologist. He has a deep background in Jungian psychology. And I can't quote him directly, but I think the conversation you two had was such a beautiful encapsulation of what we're also speaking of, which is that, as he says it, soul can only come through an individual. It cannot come through a collective. And so we all have to do that work of re-ensouling our lives, which
Mm-hmm.
can be very painful. And I think for people who are having to tear down decades of life, to find that is particularly painful. First, you have to deconstruct before you can reconstruct what you want. It's a very long labor, but we
Yeah.
have to re-ensoul our own lives in order to re-ensoul the world, and in order to really mirror or model for other people that an ensouled life is possible in this era when very little feels filled with soul.
Yeah. One of the things I love doing with people, and I loved that conversation with Michael Meade too, is I like to do, particularly with women, because I feel like so many of us are untethered or haven't really navigated or felt like we could navigate our lives through what is the greatest meaning, that I can achieve. That wouldn't really necessarily be the right word, but we're so generally conditioned to think about, well, I've got to take care of the needs of my family. I have to take care of the world before I can think about what's mine or where I feel called. And I love that idea of calling and vocation too, rather than it is such an individual, it's such an individual number. And what I love doing with women in that context is wanting exercises where people start talking about what they actually really want. And it takes a long time. It's peeling an onion because we don't really necessarily know, or we're too ashamed to go right to the heart of it out of the gate. So we, you know, maybe if we're doing it publicly, we offer up a tiny little bite of what we really are harboring inside, until we can finally feel safe enough to get there. But what's really beautiful about the work and watching other people do it is that you are stunned. And this is what brings me comfort every day when I look at the news, is not just the wealth of helpers, but the multivariate gifts that people have and how people feel called to do things that are not my calling or that I don't understand at all. But when you start in a group to hear what people want and where they feel called, it's like it's dazzling, right? In its individuated, soulful way, where you are like, I am so touched that that's what you want. I could never do that. And I have
Absolutely.
no pull there. But I think we
This,
get locked
this is
into
it.
this, like we all want the same thing, that scarcity.
I think this is totally it, Elise, because it's also, I think the other thing that overwhelms so many people is the idea that what they want to do is so silly and small and
Yeah.
they should be doing something bigger. I hear this all the time. Like, but that's so silly. That doesn't matter. And why would I bother? And there's this tyranny that people carry around of a sense that their wants and their desires are frivolous in
Mm-hmm.
comparison to the need. And it's so important to name what you're saying, which is that our job is to do our little tiny piece. It's like if every single person had one piece of the puzzle that they were supposed to lay down, that's the job. Your job is not to finish the entire puzzle. Your job
Yeah.
is to actually let everyone finish the puzzle together, but you need to keep your piece and lay your piece down. And that's where the individual and the collective come together. It's not that your job is to save society and your job is to save the planet or the world, however you think of it, or it's your job is to do your piece, have your piece, and kind of and this is something I've been talking about a lot with students, is to let the irrational guide that.
Mm.
That
Say more. Yeah.
you may not have any idea why your psyche, your being, your daemon, your soul, your spirit, however you want to speak of it, God is saying, go begin exploring needlepoint. Go begin learning Jungian psychology. Go begin writing down your dreams. Go study engineering. Like write a novel. Whatever the things are. It's hard for me to even come up with them because I'm astounded when I hear somebody's little vision or dream, how beautiful it is and how remarkably not from my own self, like to your point, right? But if we trust that irrational guide, that's where that's how we find our little puzzle piece that we can then lay into the puzzle. We're not going to get there rationally because rationally we've all been told you should get into investment banking. You should study Chinese so that you can get ahead of the transforming global economy. All these things that, like, okay, but if your soul doesn't care, it's going to rip them down later on. And then you're going to be left without a sense of where to go. Then you have to learn the language of the soul to learn what it actually wants you to be doing. And then you need to do that thing.
Yeah.
It ultimately will take control back over. And so it's better if we can all continue training in what is the irrational language of psyche or non-rational that says, ooh, go do that thing. It might whisper it, but it gets bigger when we listen.
You use the word daemon, which I love, which is this idea of sort of this. Well, do you want to offer the definition? So otherwise I'll butcher it. But that
No,
idea of that
you go for it
inner,
because I don't
yeah,
I don't think there's one tidy definition. I think people hear the word daemon. You can also pronounce it demon, which is,
yeah.
I think freaks people out a little bit more. But um, did you ever read the Philip Pullman books? Have we talked about this?
You have told me to read them, but I have not read them. No.
Elise,
Okay,
if
I'll
you
get
trust
on
me
it.
on anything, and everyone should, there's the first three. So the Philip Pullman, the his Dark Materials. I honestly, Elise, I'm a little bit like panicked that you haven't read this yet
Okay.
because it is so up your alley. It's indescribable. There's also an HBO television show that was done on his Dark Materials. So here's what I would suggest is you binge the HBO television show on his Dark
Okay.
Materials. And then this is what I did is I audiobooked the first two books of the Book of Dust, which is the next trilogy.
Okay.
But in this whole universe, which is so much about the feminine and the lost feminine in Christianity and patriarchy, indescribably so core to this story. But in this universe that Philip Pullman created, everyone has what he calls a demon. Again, it's just a different pronunciation of it, or daimon. But in this universe, everyone has a daimon that lives outside their body in animal form. And so everyone, like one person's walking around with a leopard beside them, and they are essentially the same being in two bodies. Another person has a snake wrapped around their neck. Another person has a butterfly. And they are connected, and neither of them can be killed, or the other will also die. Like they can't be separated. And the question of whether they can be separated is a huge part of the story because it's so key that they have to be in relationship and in tandem. And it very much also moves into whether they can function without imagination, because it's also this conversation of the masculine and feminine, or the rational and irrational.
Hmm.
So this quality of like listening to one's daemon, being in relationship to one's daemon, letting that daemon dictate in some form the course and direction of life, it's key. And I love that series so much because it images for us something that so many of us either feel instinctively or kind of struggle to believe is real, but that we actually have a non-rational voice or energy in us that's supporting us to find our way in the world.
Totally. Yeah. All right, I'll get on it. But that's essentially it. The daemon, it's like an inner genius. It's that spark of individuation that carries the vocation, the calling, what wants to come through you. And how do you get in touch with it? How do you realize it? How do you get on side with it rather than battling it or denying
Exactly.
its pull, right?
Exactly.
Um,
It's everything. I mean, this is
yeah,
part of global cultures everywhere. Socrates talked about taking directions from his daemon. It's remarkable we don't talk about it all the time.
I
Really.
wish we had the magic power to introduce each and every person who comes to Omega with us to their daemon, but maybe that's like the guiding mission is can we get in touch with that part of ourselves that's pulling us forward?
Great.
And
Writing
let's
that
do it
down. That's the
together.
goal.
Yeah. Let's
That's the
concretize
goal.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I can't wait. We're gonna have so much fun.
I know. And for those who can't join us, we picked May, which is a tough month, I know, for parents in particular. But hopefully we'll do it again, or we'll definitely share for people
This
who
is the
can't.
beginning. This is the beginning of beautiful things, Elise. Our
That's
first our
right.
first workshop together.
Yay. Um, all right. Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. We talked long enough, right?
That was fun. Yeah, totally. Um, all
Kiki
right.
and Kiki and oh God, Phil. Sorry, I was gonna call you Lee for some reason, Phil, but Kiki and Phil can do some good editing.
Yeah, they can, do their thing
Yeah.
without comment. Um, all right. Well, I'll be in touch, I'm sure. I
Okay.
will get this
Okay.
out next month.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Do you think we missed anything?
I don't think so. I'll drop the note. I'll drop the specifics into the intro and then Kiki, that's a good note. Let's put like the actual dates and then I'll put everything in the show notes and include old episodes and the Philip Pullman books. I'll get on it.
You really, I can't. Do you watch much TV?
No, but I'll watch it.
Do your kids? Because I think I mean, you can watch it with your kids. His Dark Materials
Okay.
it's so good. You're really gonna love it. It's completely about the feminine, the lost feminine, and the rediscovery of the feminine. Like it's
Okay.
exquisite.
Great.
Um, yeah. Do you want, I could read a little section from the Michael Meade, like I put in our shared document, part of your interview with him. Do you want me
Okay.
to read anything and they can insert it? Or is that
If
okay?
you want, what do you think?
I mean, it's so good. You can pull it in too, but
Go for
so
it.
Michael said, I just was looking at this before we spoke, before we jumped on together, Elise, and I love this. There's so many pieces from that conversation I love, but he says, we're back to the idea that each one of us can contribute by becoming more soulful, which will also mean we're more creative. We're more in love with the world, with other people, with ourselves, because the soul is the source of love.
I love that. And I
It's
think
so
it goes back
beautiful.
to Francis Weller talking about like how we will only protect what we love. And I think we're
Yes,
seeing that too.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And so everything that we're saying about the individual as the creative source and the source of soul, it's so important to also name it as the place of love, where love can come through and connect with others so that we're connecting with each other through love, not just through a kind of viral sense of panic. Like they're different nervous system responses. And
100%.
we can join together in both ways, but they're completely different responses.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right.
Good to be with you.
Bye.
Good to see you. Talk soon. Bye,
Bye.
love.